Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we are plunging into a topic that sparks incredible curiosity for so many people. How we age, and perhaps even more importantly, how we might be able to influence that process. We've pulled together a stack of fascinating material for this deep dive, zeroing in on the insights and personal strategies of one of the leading voices in the field, Dr. David Sinclair. He's a professor of genetics at Harvard Medical School, and his work has really shifted the conversation around aging.
That's right. Our mission today is to unpack his approach, digging into the science that drives his thinking and the practical steps he says he takes himself, drawing directly from the research and his personal experiences detailed in these sources. It's compelling stuff, especially when he talks about his own biological markers, suggesting his body is younger and healthier than it was a decade ago.
Younger than a decade ago. He even mentions markers better than a 20-year-old's, according to the material. Okay. Let's really dive into these sources you've shared and understand what Dr. Sinclair's longevity playbook looks like and, why he believes it works. So, right at the outset, he sets this really intriguing stage with that personal claim, doesn't he? That scientifically, measuring key biological indicators, he believes his body is actually functioning younger and healthier now in his mid-50s than it was when he was 44.
Right.
He specifically references improvements in areas like testosterone levels, glucose control, inflammation markers, and even the composition of his blood cells, stating some are better than you'd typically find in a 20-year-old.
And that's a critical point. He's not just saying he feels younger, he's tracking measurable biological data. The core idea he explores is that aging isn't just an inevitable, sort of uncontrollable decline.
Right.
Living a healthy life can fundamentally slow the rate at which your body accumulates damage. He frames it as preventing the corruption of the body software. And the exciting potential is that you might not just slow it down, but potentially even reboot some systems towards a more youthful, functional state. It's about pushing back against that biological clock, not just hoping it ticks slower.
That idea of rebooting the system is pretty revolutionary compared to just managing decline.
Right.
Yeah. All right, let's get practical. What are the actual pillars of his approach based on these sources? Starting with exercise. He emphasizes a specific type of exercise, and the rule he follows seems surprisingly straightforward.
It is simple, yeah, but the underlying science is powerful. He talks about exercising 3 times a week, and the key metric isn't the duration or, how many miles you cover, but the intensity. His guideline is to push yourself hard enough that you lose your breath.
Lose your breath. That sounds almost too simple. What's happening in the body during that state that he finds so beneficial?
Well, when you're exercising intensely enough that you can't easily hold a conversation, you're creating a state of temporary, mild hypoxia.
Yeah.
Basically a slight reduction in the oxygen available to your tissues. He explains that this isn't harmful in short bursts. In fact, he says it's a very good stimulator. This stress signals the body to adapt and become stronger.
So it's a beneficial stress.
Exactly. It triggers mechanisms that build muscle, improve blood flow and cardiovascular health, and crucially causes tissues to release beneficial signaling molecules, chemicals that communicate throughout the body and are linked to slowing aging processes.
And what's the payoff he mentions?
He highlights the payoff. The material suggests that deliberately losing your breath for as little as 10 minutes, just 3 times a week, can offer remarkable health benefits. It's linked to lowering rates of major diseases by as much as 30%.
30%? Wow. Okay, so it's not necessarily about grinding out long, moderate workouts every single day, but rather shorter, intense efforts done consistently.
Precisely. The emphasis is on hitting that intensity threshold to trigger those specific biological responses and making sure it's a regular part of your weekly routine. It's a form of beneficial stress, really.
Beneficial stress. That sounds like a theme that might carry through other areas. Okay, let's move on to diet. The sources point out that he considers the most important eating habit, surprisingly, isn't what you eat first, but when you eat it. It's about eating less often.
This is indeed a major focus for him. He argues that the modern pattern of, 3 meals a day plus frequent snacking, where your body is constantly processing incoming food, may actually accelerate aging.
Right, the constant grazing.
Yeah. The alternative he practices and discusses is time-restricted feeding or strategically skipping meals.
And he takes this quite far, doesn't he? He aims to eat within a 6-hour window daily, often consolidating his intake into one large meal, typically dinner. He even mentions he's now progressed to eating just 1 meal a day, seeing the improvements in his body's markers, that 20-year-old body, as a nice bonus of this lifestyle change.
He definitely commits to it. And the science he points to explains why that fasting period is so key. When you give your body an extended break from digestion, it shifts its focus from growth and storage to repair and maintenance.
Okay.
This window of not eating significantly boosts the body's natural defenses against aging. It facilitates what he calls a deep cleanse, activating processes like autophagy.
Autophagy, that's like cellular self-cleaning, right?
Yeah.
Where the cell recycles old or damaged components.
Exactly. It's a vital process for cellular health and longevity. And he links this heavily to sirtuins. These are a family of genes that he spent much of his career studying and which he discusses extensively in his book, Lifespan.
Right, the longevity genes.
Yeah, they act like guardians of the genome, protecting against damage. Critically, sirtuins become highly active when energy availability is low, when you're not constantly taking in sugar or protein. So fasting or time-restricted eating turns on these sirtuins, which then defend against the molecular damage that drives aging.
Interesting.
He even mentions how this state can have therapeutic potential, citing studies suggesting fasting can be beneficial alongside conventional treatments for conditions like type 1 diabetes, multiple sclerosis, and potentially enhancing the effectiveness of chemotherapy for certain cancers.
It's incredible how simply not eating can flick a switch on these fundamental protective pathways. But let's be real, shifting to eating just within a 6-hour window, or even one meal a day, sounds incredibly challenging. How does someone navigate the constant hunger pangs at the beginning?
That's a crucial practical hurdle, absolutely. He offers a few tips from his own experience. The simplest is to focus on fluids throughout the day. Coffee, tea, without milk or sugar, obviously, or just hot water, can help significantly in managing hunger.
Okay, fluids.
If you absolutely need something small, a few nuts might help due to the protein content, but the goal is to minimize external calorie intake during the fasting period. The core principle is to aim for at least 16 hours without eating, or with very minimal intake, followed by an 8-hour eating window.
16.8, yeah.
Right. And as he aims for, going over 20 hours is even more effective because it completely avoids the circulation of external glucose.
Okay, so fluids help, maybe a few nuts. But there's also this mentioned adaptation period, right? That sounds key to making it sustainable.
Absolutely vital. He explains that your body, specifically your liver, is used to getting glucose delivered directly from the food you eat. When you stop providing that constant supply through frequent meals, the liver needs to learn to generate its own glucose from internal stores, a process called gluconeogenesis.
Right, making its own fuel.
Exactly. He says it takes a few weeks, ideally 2 to 3, for the liver to really get good at this. During that initial period, you might feel hungry, maybe a bit shaky, or experience some brain fog. That's normal.
Got it.
But once your liver adapts and starts producing a steady supply of internal glucose, those feelings often disappear. He describes his own experience vividly, saying his liver making sugar is a lot smarter than my eyes and my mouth eating sugar because it provides a smooth, consistent energy level.
Avoiding the spikes and crashes.
Exactly. It eliminates the blood sugar spikes and crashes that happen after eating, which trigger ghrelin, release the hunger hormone, and cause that tired, foggy feeling. He says achieving this state is so beneficial for focus and energy that he really wishes he had started this practice much sooner.
That makes sense. Training your liver to be a steady energy source rather than riding the roller coaster of external food. Okay, so when he eats is critical. Now, within that concentrated eating window, what does Dr. Sinclair eat? The sources say he made a significant shift to going almost completely to plants.
That was another major dietary pivot he discusses, yeah. He transitioned to a diet overwhelmingly based on plants and reports noticing significant personal improvements, feeling better, looking better, with clearer skin and improved memory. He connects this observation to studies of populations with high rates of longevity, noting that they are often smaller in stature and tend to consume predominantly vegetarian or plant-based diets.
But it's not just any plants, is it? He talks about focusing on what he calls stress plants. That sounds intriguing.
It does. This brings in a concept he's very involved with called xenohormesis. The hypothesis is that plants, when they're grown in conditions that challenge them, a bit like organic farming, where they aren't protected by pesticides or herbicides, facing environmental stressors, produce specific molecules for their own survival. These are often polyphenols. And the fascinating idea is that when we consume these slightly stressed plants, these same molecules can trigger beneficial stress responses in our bodies, activating pathways that improve our health and longevity.
Wow.
He and a colleague actually coined this term, prompted by research showing that certain plant molecules, like those found in grapes, can activate sirtuins, specifically SIRT1, which we discussed earlier.
So the plant stress response becomes our benefit, and these polyphenols supposedly do remarkable things. We hear about resveratrol from red wine, but there are others like phyzitine or quercetin.
Exactly. These are classes of molecules found in various plants. The science suggests they work by interacting with and activating or inhibiting key proteins in our cells that are important for health and longevity pathways.
Okay, so how do we find these stress plants?
For practical guidance, he suggests that organically grown foods are more likely to have experienced these stressors. His simple, memorable rule is stress your food so you don't have to stress your body in the same way. He advises focusing on plants with vibrant, deep colors, bright reds, purples, dark greens, as these colors often indicate a high concentration of these beneficial polyphenols.
Eat the rainbow, essentially.
Pretty much. He even mentions laboratory studies where providing polyphenols to mice made them significantly healthier and improved their endurance, commenting they ran further like they've been exercising.
That's a powerful image. Are there specific examples of these stress plants or colorful foods he incorporates regularly?
Yes. In his morning routine, he specifically includes green tea and particularly matcha, which he calls a stress food packed with polyphenols like EGCG, known for its anti-inflammatory and potential anti-cancer properties.
Matcha, got it.
He strongly emphasizes eating plenty of leafy greens, noting that particularly spinach is great because it provides iron, vitamins, and those beneficial compounds. For cooking, he uses olive oil generously, a staple of the Mediterranean diet which contains oleic acid, another molecule shown to activate sirtuins.
Olive oil, makes sense.
He also mentions that for people finding a completely plant-based diet difficult or too drastic a change, the Mediterranean or Okinawan diets are excellent science-backed starting points, particularly for Westerners.
That's helpful.
Yeah, he followed the Okinawan diet himself for years, which he describes as being predominantly carbohydrate-based, using rice, ideally brown, though he notes white rice causes undesirable glucose spikes, with lots of local, organic Chinese, Japanese vegetables and soy-based foods, often with a little fish included. He sees these as offering the biggest bang for the buck in terms of longevity benefits without requiring an all-or-nothing approach initially.
Okay, we've covered exercise intensity, the timing of meals, and the types of plants. What about supplements? The sources mention 3 specific supplements Dr. Sinclair consistently takes, and this feels like a good place to emphasize the disclaimer provided. He is sharing what he takes, but he does not recommend supplements for others, endorse specific brands, or sell them himself.
Absolutely. It's incredibly important to highlight that disclaimer upfront and clearly. He is discussing his personal regimen based on his interpretation of the research, not providing medical advice or a universal prescription. It's also worth contrasting this with the history of supplement research. He notes that while antioxidants were once thought to be key, they've been really unsuccessful at lengthening lifespan in laboratory tests, even in simple organisms. His focus is different, targeting specific pathways.
Right, it's more targeted. So what are the 3?
So the 3 supplements he consistently takes are, first, resveratrol. This is the polyphenol often referred to as the red wine chemical found in grapes and other plants. He mentions taking a gram of it, often mixing it into yogurt in the morning. As we touched on earlier, its link to longevity is its ability to activate sirtuins, particularly SIRT1.
Okay, resveratrol, number 2.
Second is NMN, which stands for nicotinamide mononucleotide. This is a precursor molecule that your body uses to create NAD, or nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide.
Yeah, NAD, right.
Yeah, NAD is an absolutely fundamental chemical coenzyme required for countless processes essential for life, including energy metabolism and DNA repair. The problem, as he explains, is that NAD levels unfortunately decline significantly as we age.
That's not good.
No. And without sufficient NAD, those protective sirtuin genes we talked about earlier don't function effectively. So lower NAD means your cellular defense and repair mechanisms are weakening. Taking NMN, based on the studies he cites, has been shown to effectively boost NAD levels back up to those seen in a healthy 20-year-old.
Wow, back to 20-year-old levels.
That's what the research suggests, yeah. He mentions early-stage clinical trials by his colleagues at Harvard suggesting this can have health benefits, such as improvements in cholesterol and blood pressure. He takes NMN daily.
Interesting. And the third one?
The third one is metformin. He notes this one is perhaps more controversial in the context of longevity because it is a classified prescription drug, though he quickly adds it's widely considered one of the world's safest drugs, based on decades of use.
Okay.
Its primary and intended use is to help control blood sugar in people with type 2 diabetes. However, a significant finding from large observational studies is that people who take metformin, including those without diabetes, tend to live a lot longer and have lower rates of age-related diseases.
Even without diabetes.
Without diabetes, yeah. There is accumulating evidence suggesting it provides protection against cardiovascular disease, frailty, and neurodegenerative conditions like Alzheimer's, potentially by influencing similar energy-sensing pathways as fasting.
That's a really interesting trio, each seemingly targeting different aspects of cellular function related to aging, but all rooted in affecting these core metabolic or stress response pathways. Okay, shifting gears now beyond adding beneficial things, what did Dr. Sinclair actively remove or significantly reduce from his diet? Often cutting things out is just as impactful as adding things in.
Absolutely. And according to his experience and the research he discusses, the first and perhaps most crucial thing to eliminate or drastically reduce is what he calls the big killer, sugar.
Sugar, no surprise there.
Right. He specifically calls out glucose, and particularly fructose, as being pernicious. He cites studies where giving animals large amounts of glucose, especially fructose, rapidly leads to serious metabolic issues like fatty liver disease and diabetes. He makes a very strong statement saying the best predictor of your long-term longevity that we know of is your blood sugar level.
The best predictor. Why is high blood sugar so detrimental?
He explains it in vivid terms. High levels of glucose in the bloodstream attach to and essentially damage a lot of proteins throughout the body in a process called glycation. He describes it as the body essentially becoming caramelized over time.
Caramelized? That doesn't sound good.
No, it doesn't. These damaged glycated proteins don't function correctly. He also notes that cancer cells love sugar and live on sugar, suggesting high blood sugar environments may fuel their growth. He advises being very cautious with sugar intake, including avoiding excessive fruit, and especially fruit juice, because even natural sugars can cause significant spikes in blood sugar.
Even fruit juice?
Yeah. He ties this back to the time-restricted eating we discussed. He emphasizes that once your liver has adapted that period of about 2 weeks we talked about where it learns gluconeogenesis, your body can produce a steady, controlled amount of sugar internally.
Right, the smarter sugar supply.
Exactly. He feels this internally regulated glucose supply, which avoids the spikes and crashes, is a lot smarter than my eyes and my mouth eating sugar from external sources. He also mentions a tip to help reduce the sugar spike if you do have something sweet. Eat it at the very end of a meal, as the other food can slow absorption.
Ah, good tip.
And he offers a realistic perspective, saying you don't need to be draconian. Occasional treats like a few scoops of ice cream are fine, but it shouldn't be a regular, large habit. He also mentions healthier sugar substitutes like monk fruit or stevia.
Okay, so cut the obvious sugar. What was next on his list of things to reduce?
Bread and excessive carbohydrates. He explains he cut out eating bread, which had been a daily habit, and noticed immediate improvements in his blood work, particularly his glucose metabolism.
Just from cutting bread?
Apparently so. He illustrates the typical pattern many people experience with things like toast or orange juice in the morning. You get a rapid spike in blood sugar, feel a quick burst of energy, but then your body produces a large amount of insulin to deal with the influx.
The spike.
Right. This often leads to clearing too much glucose from the bloodstream, resulting in hypoglycemia, a state of low blood sugar. That's when you feel that strong hunger return quickly, driven by ghrelin, along with maybe shakiness, fatigue, and brain fog.
Ah, the carb crash. I know that feeling.
Yeah, exactly. He contrasts this sharply with his current state, where his adapted liver provides that steady, level supply of glucose, eliminating those debilitating crashes and the associated brain fog. He says this change alone has made him feel so much better he genuinely wishes he had made it earlier.
That vividly explains the carb crash phenomenon. What about meat?
Yes, meat was another significant reduction. He found that cutting back on meat further improved his key blood markers, specifically cholesterol and triglycerides, which was a point of concern for him given his familial history of heart disease.
Okay.
He notes it's not just the protein content of meat, but often the accompanying fat. While he admits he enjoys the taste of meat, he concludes that the science says plants give you better bang for the buck for longevity than meat protein.
Better bang for the buck from plants. Why?
He explains this is because the specific amino acid profile in plant protein tends to stimulate longevity pathways like sirtuins and mTOR in a beneficial way when intake isn't constant. Conversely, constantly consuming animal protein might signal the body that resources are abundant, shifting focus away from activating those stress response and repair mechanisms crucial for longevity.
So it's about signaling the body correctly.
That seems to be the idea. He isn't strictly against eating meat occasionally and points out that fish is beneficial for omega-3 fatty acids. His main point is prioritizing and focusing more heavily on plants for the reasons we discussed.
And the final major cut was dairy.
He describes this change as more of an experiment. He didn't have an allergy or intolerance, but simply wanted to see what would happen if he eliminated dairy. He reports that it did lead to further improvements in his health markers.
Even dairy made a difference.
It seems so for him. He suggests, based on the science, the likely reason is similar to the meat reduction. Cutting out the large amount of protein from dairy, and also things like eggs, which he reduced, further influenced the mTOR pathway. This is another key energy sensing pathway, important for longevity in animal studies and very likely in humans. He notes that reducing dairy seemed to activate this pathway in a way that had never done so before when he was regularly consuming it.
Interesting how these different food groups impact those pathways.
Exactly. And just quickly, he mentions recent research indicating that daily alcohol consumption is really not good from a longevity perspective, leading him to cut it out entirely, again, reinforcing his focus on plant-based strategies.
Right.
He does offer a final tip for those who aren't ready to give up wine completely. Choose stress-sensitive grape varieties like Pinot Noir, as they tend to contain higher levels of beneficial resveratrol because they've had to work harder to survive.
Pinot Noir noted. Wow, that really does build a comprehensive picture of Dr. Sinclair's approach, drawing directly from these sources. It covers everything from the intensity of exercise and the timing of meals to the specific plant foods he prioritizes, the supplements he takes, and the major food groups he actively avoids.
What's truly fascinating is how he integrates high-level genetic and molecular research into these very practical daily habits. It's all about understanding and leveraging the body's own ancient survival mechanisms, those stress response pathways, through targeted choices in how we move, when we eat, and what we eat.
And it sounds like, based on his own experience and the markers he tracks, these significant lifestyle changes have yielded measurable, significant results for him personally.
Absolutely. This raises an important question for you, the listener, as you consider these science-backed strategies. Thinking about the core principle of activating your body's own longevity pathways through specific stressors like intense exercise, time-restricted eating, or nutrient-rich trace plants, how might exploring small, consistent changes inspired by these ideas fit into your journey towards supporting your body's health and resilience for the long term?